Good evening, YouTube, and welcome back once again to the EdWord. I am your host, Ghostface, as I will once again be doing my episode review and recap video for the most recent episode of Scream titled Ghosts. Now, before I begin, of course, as Eddie always does, and he makes me do it too, even though I don't really give a shit, as I must warn you, this video will be full of big spoilers. Ooh. So, with that being said, you have been warned. If you are not caught up on Scream, if you haven't seen the most recent episode, do not keep watching or listening to this video, as I will be discussing pretty big spoilers. Not only that, but a theory as to who the killer is. So this episode is basically like an aftermath episode of Will's death. You know, he died at the end of the last episode. Really brutal, by the way. Whew, that was a good death scene. Whew, that was violent. And of course, it's left poor Emma severely traumatized and battered. And, and now the cops are, like, putting guards on her. Nobody's letting her out of her sight. So the killer can't really taunt her at all in this episode because people are protecting her. They're on top of her 24/7. And Jake survived his stabbing wound from the bowling alley, so he's alive and well. Unfortunately, his friends have to break it to him that his good buddy Will has been murdered. Now, what's interesting is that Jake's wound was not severe, and much like Will's wound when he was first stabbed, it was just above the heart. You know, it's like as if the killer intentionally stabbed him non-fatally, or maybe it was on accident, but it could have been an intentional non-fatal wound because they want Jake alive for some reason, or Jake is one of two killers, and I'll get to that momentarily. So this episode, like I said, was like a big aftermath episode for mostly Emma, but her friends and family around her, and she's completely pushing down all of her pain and anguish that she's feeling. She's putting on this facade that, oh, I'm okay, everything's happy, la 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 la, I'm fine, don't worry about me. It's like, and her friends, of course, Audrey and Noah can see right through, like, oh yeah, you're not okay, you need help, you're in a lot of pain. And Kieran, her new boyfriend, is trying to be supportive, but it's also like she's trying to push him away as well because she just lost her ex-boyfriend. She's probably not in the mood for some snuggling, and he seems pretty cool with that, or at least he acts like he is. But basically, this episode was interesting because we got to see, like, Emma's imagination really fuck with her. You know, she kept having flashes of Will's split in half body, which was nasty as hell, by the way, but really cool. I really liked it. So did Eddie. But what really struck me and Eddie about this particular episode is when Emma is confiding in the reporter Piper Shaw while she's doing a podcast. Piper says to her, because Emma reveals about how her dad left when he couldn't handle living with himself after surviving the Brandon James murders, how her dad left her and her mom, and then Piper seems to open up to her, trying to come off as a friend, saying, as someone whose dad is never coming back, seize your chance to talk to your dad, because second chances hardly come by. Because Emma thinks that her dad has come to visit her while she was in the hospital. But did he really, or was it all up here in her head? But that's when it hit me and Eddie. It's like we both had an epiphany at that very moment. And I think a lot of other fans have felt this way too. Piper is one of the two killers. She made a reference to being a kid who grew up without a father. And that's extremely important, and I'm going to refer to that later in the video as to why it is important, but Piper immediately became one of my prime suspects. Speaking of suspects, Audrey and Noah continued their search for proof of Mr. Branson's guilt, or at least his real identity, and if he is indeed at all has anything to do with these murders that have been going on in their little town for the past couple episodes. And speaking of investigating, it turns out that finally been brought to the attention, thanks to Piper Shaw. She has brought footage of the mayor hiding a body in his trunk in his garage to the sheriff, and the sheriff brings the mayor in for questioning, but the mayor won't answer any questions yet, and the sheriff doesn't want to believe he's involved in all these killings, so the mayor agrees to only reveal it to his daughter, Brooke. And Brooke is horrified, of course, that it could be her mother in that body bag. Her mother, that's the mayor, her father claimed, who is in rehab in Arizona because he put her there. But Brooke has a horrible, hard time believing him, and I certainly don't blame her. If he has lied so much about so many things, what else could he keep lying about? But fortunately, they provide her with a phone number, and she gets to talk to her mom, who is alive and safe and sound in a rehab clinic in Arizona, just like the mayor said. But then the question remains, whose body was in that body bag? This episode, we got closure on a few things. Not a lot of things, but we got some answers finally. It turns out it is Brooke's mother's drug dealer or junkie friend. It turns out Brooke's mother has a serious drug problem. Well, we already knew that, but she and her friend got high in their house, and when the mayor came home, her husband, when the mayor came home, he found the guy had OD'd and was dead on the floor. So he hid the body to avoid a potential scandal. And he tries to claim and reason with Brooke that he did it to protect their family. But it sounds like he was only trying to protect his own image as the mayor. He didn't want an embarrassing scandal that could ruin his chances of getting elected as mayor of Lakewood again. And that still pisses off Brooke as to why he wouldn't go to the police in the first place. You know, if the guy just OD'd on the floor there, why didn't he call the paramedics or the police to come help? Why did he try to cover it up? But, you know, the point remains is that the mayor is not the killer, or is he? But it seems highly unlikely that he is. He may have his own dirty little secrets going on, but I don't think he's the one who dons the mask. At least he doesn't don it as well as I do. Woo! Anyway, moving on. So we get some answers to that. It turns out the body the mayor was moving was the drug dealer who had OD'd, the guy who was supplying the mayor's wife with whatever drugs she was taking, and the mother of Brooke is alive and well in a rehab clinic in Arizona. But Brooke is still pissed at her daddy, and I certainly don't blame her. So moving on from that, Emma, who suffers some kind of panic attack in high school when she keeps having flashes of her dead boyfriend and numerous other things, she's put in the hospital under intensive care watch, and then who should show up but her father. Her father, whom she hasn't seen in 8 years, has arrived. And he attempts to explain to her why he left, but, you know, it feels like she should be kind of happy to see him, but she wants nothing to do with him. And then, of course, she even thinks to herself, wait a second, is this even real? Is this really happening? And that's when it cuts to the next scene where Piper is visiting her, and that's when Emma reveals her father came to visit, and that's when Piper says that really interesting line about being a kid without a father. And like I said, I'll bring that up in a few seconds. So, you know, that's what happens. And it's like this whole time, whenever we're with Emma in this episode, we don't know if she's hallucinating or what she's seeing is real or her scenes with other characters are real. But when she's by herself, we don't know what's really happening. And so when Emma has this vision that she's realized there's a vital clue inside her head somewhere, she has her friend Audrey send her the footage of the abandoned hospital they were checking out a few episodes ago. And it turns out they missed the picture of an ultrasound. Somebody's ultrasound was in that hospital operating room. Who could it be now? Who could it be now? Sorry, that was kind of lame. My bad. Anyway, but, you know, as it turns out, dun, 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 her mother had a baby when she was 16. Her mom comes to visit. Emma shows her the picture of the ultrasound, demands to know whose baby that is, if she has anything to do with it. Then she thinks that it's her mommy because the name says Anderson right on the picture, as if that's the mother's last name, which was her mom's last name. Turns out she got pregnant when she was 16, and her parents helped her give the baby up for adoption in secret. And that's why they left Lakewood for a short while, but then they returned, and then she reconnected with Emma's father. And it turns out the whole reason she had this child in the first place was because she and Emma's father, it turns out Emma's father had cheated on Maggie, on her mother, with one of her closest friends, and Brandon James happened to be the guy who came to be the shoulder she could cry on. And when he drove her home later that night, sparks flew and she got knocked up with his baby. And what happened to Brandon James later? He goes nuts on a killing spree and he dies, shot to death by the police. Now, if that baby was given up for adoption and they found out what happened to their birth father, how do you think that baby would react or feel? That is exactly why Piper is now my number one suspect. One of my number one suspects for this show is because when she makes reference about growing up without a father, it made me and Eddie realize she could be one of our two killers. She could very well be in on all of this, and she's working with someone else because she was in the room when the killer appeared and attempted to kill her and took Will hostage and stabbed him almost fatally. She could have been in on all of that. So she could be the one who was the adopted baby who was given up by Maggie in secret all those years ago, and they're taking it out on Emma. This is all about revenge and resentment. Somebody resents Emma for the life that she has had and is trying to take that from her as punishment to exact their revenge on her and her mother. And even her own mother admits that because the baby was born and the adoption thing was so secret, she didn't even know if it was a boy or a girl. Now, Piper could be an innocent pawn in all of this, so it could be one of the guys, someone close to Emma's age. Then again, it could be Piper and one of the guys who's actually working with Piper in secret. Who does that leave us with? Noah, the film geek. Branson, the shady substitute teacher with a secret. Because not only is he banging one of his students, but he's got a dark secret. It turns out, thanks to Noah and Audrey's efforts, they discover that his real name is Seth Palmer, who was a teacher who was teaching at a college, had a relationship with an 18-year-old student, and she ends up murdered, and then he disappears. And he suddenly reemerges in Lakewood a few years later. So perhaps Branson is a hired knife for Piper, if it is her and Branson. Perhaps Branson dons the cape, he's not Superman or anything, dons the mask and the outfit and does the actual killing while Piper tells him who to kill. Or maybe he's not the killer at all. Maybe his problem's just his illicit affair with Brooke. And of course, speaking of affair with Brooke, Brooke turns to him when she's in a complete state of disrepair. Oh, my life's falling apart. My father's in jail, but my mother's in rehab, so she's alive. Oh, make love to me, teacher. He's like, don't worry, baby. Come here. I'll take care of you. That's not exactly what they said, but you get my drift. But, so, they have their little fling in the auditorium when he suddenly disappears because he thinks he hears something, leaving Brooke alone in her lingerie. Whew, does she look hot as well. And then when she tries to ask him, Seth, where are you, Seth? The spotlight shines on her, and who's coming at her from the audience's point of view? But the killer quickly slashes her arm, non-fatal. She just gets a nasty cut, and he suddenly disappears. And who should reappear at that very moment? Mr. Branson. And then who should appear after that very moment? The police. The sheriff put out an APB on Branson once Audrey and Noah told him about what they had found in the classroom. The murder weapon, the knife that was hidden in the air duct of Mr. Branson's classroom, and the revelation of his real identity. So now the police have him in custody. Whether or not he's the killer remains to be seen. I think, personally, if Piper Shaw is working with someone, it's Jake. Jake was stabbed in the similar way that Will was when he and Piper were attacked by the killer a few episodes ago. Jake survived his wound as well because he was stabbed either above or below the heart, non-fatal. It was injuring, but non-fatal. So Jake could very well be a part of this, and he could have a few screws loose in his head as well. Overall, though, great episode, big revelations, and a huge epiphany on me and Eddie's part. We both realized Piper could be one of the two killers. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode as much as Eddie and I did. Who do you think the killer is? Do you agree with us? Do you think it's Piper Shaw, and why? Leave your thoughts and opinions down below. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you once again, as always, for tuning in here on the EdWord. I speak for Eddie and myself when I say thank you for all your views and your support. We really appreciate it. And don't forget to catch the final 2 episodes of Season 1 of Scream on MTV as we get closer to the season finale, where hopefully we will learn who the killer or killers are and why they're doing this. So thanks again for tuning in, YouTube, and have a great rest of the night. And of course, until next time, what's your favorite scary movie?